Firstly, thank you to the Gin Guild for inviting me back. I must have either done something right last year or done something wrong. You can have a look at it either way. The topic I'm going to talk to you about today is Barrow-loads of Botanicals and the danger of using too many conflicting botanicals just for the sake of numbers. So, when I got this topic, I thought that we needed to look at, again, review the market on a global level, just to kind of re-establish where we are as a gin, because while on this room we all think gin is the big thing, you need to put it into context where it sits in the spirit and market as a whole. A scientific view on it, and I had a little bit of a panic that I said to Matthew earlier on because he covered a little bit of what I'm going to cover, but luckily it's pretty much the same thing, so we're both on the right track, so it must be good. Trade perspective, the gatekeepers as I like to call them, a little bit about what consumers think, and then draw it to conclusion, and then maybe some questions afterwards. So, let's remind ourselves where we are in the, and this is just, I'm taking it from a global level, not different markets, so it's this total global level. So where does the gin market stand at the moment? So some just key facts. So the total spirits consumed is just shy of 32 million 9 litres. And of that, gin represents 10% of the total spirits consumption. Vodka's still at 30 and whiskey's at 25. So gin's coming up there. So all the gin categories for all the categories in gin are in growth. In total growth are about 7%. When we break it down into the gin categories, the standard is around 3%, premium is growing at 10%, and the super premium, being the largest, at 33%. So I use this data, which is the IWSR data. The IWSR data has only just come out for this year, so apologies I'm having to use last year's, but I don't imagine it's going to change that much. So I was interested to see, was there an average number of botanicals used in each of the categories? So for a standard gin, for a premium gin, for a super premium gin. Because I think we all have this, or I definitely had this perception that more super premium gins have more botanicals in there. So I took the top 10 brands and I looked at the botanicals and I looked at the mean number of botanicals, which is the average, the mode, which is how frequently that number exists, and the range. And I did this for each of the categories, and I'm just going to run through them, and I was pleasantly surprised. So the mean number for this category is 8, the mode is also 8, and the range is from 4 up to 9. If we look again at premium, we're now looking at 10 is our average number. Mode is also 10, and the range is now 4 to 19. If we now go to the super premium, our mean number is now 17. Our mode is 10, and our range is 4 to 47. So, in summary, the average number of botanicals tends to go up as we go through the categories, from the standard at 8 through to the super premium, premium at 10, and super premium at 17. So is this for the sake of numbers? We shall see. Interesting, if I remove the highest number of botanicals from the groups, the average now comes down to 9 for each of them. So maybe there may be a few brands that are just skewing the results. So, scientific bit, and this is from the perspective of botanicals and their essential oils. So, just a quick reminder of what botanicals are and what they do. So, botanicals contain essential oils which are extracted through distillation. Essential oils are complex mixtures that contain hundreds of individual components or compounds. The human nose, as we know, can detect these compounds in parts per trillion. And an example I've used there is alpha-pinene, which is a key essential oil in juniper. And this can be noticed, it's recorded that this could be noticed at 139 parts per billion, and it's recognised, i.e. we can describe that flavour, at 167 parts per billion. So in other words, it's quite an easier one to identify. So what I did is I took a GC mass spec profile of a gin, and I just looked at it for 3 of the key botanicals, which I call the Holy Trinity, that go into most of the gins I created, which is juniper, coriander, and angelica. So So the table I've got here shows these key compounds. So if you look at these 3 botanicals, we've got major compounds that are within the makeup of these botanicals. And what we can see is that there's an overlapping of key compounds. So things like alpha-pinene, beta-pinene, excuse my pronunciation, I say pinene, limonene and parathymine, just to name a few. So a lot of botanicals have similar flavour components. So we could argue that using conflicting botanicals is pointless because the flavours are so similar, they overlap and cancel each other's effect out. But a caveat to that is there are also some very minor compounds which are so insignificant, and Matthew pointed this before, I think with licorice and cassia, it was below the detection limits. These minor compounds, whilst they're very low on the GC mass spec, they have a significant impact on the sensory profile, so we shouldn't discount them. So my view is that the choice of botanicals is important, and I personally think the best way to do it is by the nose and taste. So what does the trade think, the gatekeepers? And this, what I mean by gatekeepers, I mean the barmen, the mixologists, the wholesalers, the bloggers, that's who I classify as my trade. And in a crowded market, how do we stand out against each other? The last count, and I just double-checked with Nicholas, the Gin Guild, we have 500 plus gin brands in the UK, and we reckon there's around 2,000 worldwide. So how do we all stand out against each other in the market? Botanicals is a main way of doing this, okay? So it allows us to have our own recognisable USPs, unique selling points. But we should be very mindful that there are good selling points and bad selling points. The trade wants credible, authentic, clear and easy points of difference that they can translate very quickly to their consumers when they're asking for a gin about that brand. A good example, in my opinion, is what I've done with Quintessential Brands gin portfolio over the last 10 years plus. So in our portfolio, we have now 6 brands. And we clearly demonstrate with the 6 brands a very different flavour profile. So we have Greenall's, which we've just recently relaunched as packaging, literally 6 to 8 weeks ago, in our classical juniper-led style gin. We have Opia in the spicy category. We have Bloom in the floral-led category. And we have Greenall's Extra Reserve, which is the newest one. We only literally launched it last month, so it's weeks old. It's the newest baby. And this is using a citrus. So we've taken the lemon notes from the Greenall's and we've exploited that with more citrus flavour. So it's a citrus-forward gin. We then got Thomas Dakin, which is our savoury-led gin. And then we've got a flavoured gin, which has Scottish raspberries and blackberries in there. So I have been very mindful over the last 10 years plus of creating gins that I have to complement my juniper. If I don't, I'm not making a gin, I'm making a lovely flavoured vodka. But the botanicals that I use all have an individual role in the recipes. So I can tell you every single botanical, well, every distiller should be able to tell you what botanicals are in their gin, but I can also tell you what individual role those botanicals do in my gin. I'm not one for putting, and I will openly say, and I have done on many masterclasses, that I do not put botanicals in gin for the sake of numbers. They have a certain role in the gin. And we're also seeing this as a trend, so that botanicals are not only helping us with our USPs, but they're also helping in the on-trade with garnishes. So the bartenders can latch onto our key botanicals that we're using. They can use those as garnishes. And the garnishes are starting to act as a brand badge, so to speak. So again, it reconfirms those messages from the botanicals through to the garnish, through to the drink. And we're also starting to see a bit of a trend coming through with tonics now, with people putting flavours in tonics, which complement right back up the supply chain to the gin. Consumer perspective, which at the end of the day is the one that we all need to know about. I did a very loose questionnaire on Facebook and Twitter of kind of my group, and seeing what it came out with. I know it's probably not very statistically correct, but it was the way I kind of did it. And I wanted to, I asked people, and I've been asking people over the last couple of months when I knew I was doing this talk, and the things I wanted to know was, do the customers actually know what botanicals are? And thankfully, yes, nowadays, people do know, our general consumers are knowing what botanicals are. We're not having to explain that fact to them. And I think this is helped by gin festivals, World Gin Day we've got coming up, we've got every bar seems to have a gin night, there's masterclasses, there's lots of small craft distillers popping up with great visitor centres where consumers can go to these, so they're generally learning more about it and know what botanicals are. Do the customers know how many botanicals there are in their favourite gin? No, generally they don't. They don't know which botanicals are in their gin. They couldn't tell you how many, botanicals are in a certain gin. They might be able to say what the key ones are, but I don't generally think mainstream consumers can list off the botanicals in the gin. They may appreciate a gin has a certain amount of botanicals, so that might lead them to choose a gin because it has X amount more botanicals than another one. But if that gin doesn't taste balanced, that consumer will not go back to try that gin. So whilst the number of botanicals drove them to try it the first time, repeat buy is not always going to be unless the gin is balanced. And do they care? They said, well, generally, they're not that bothered about the number of botanicals. They couldn't really tell you what they are. They just want a good, balanced, refreshing drink. So, conclusion. So back to the original question. The dangers of using too many conflicting botanicals merely for the sake of numbers. Hopefully, I've demonstrated in a relatively, because I haven't got the red light on, so I'm doing okay, in a relatively short time today that whilst there is a need to have different botanicals to make us stand out from our competitors in the market, we should choose wisely, not only for our own credibility, but for the trade's credibility, for gin's credibility as a whole. So botanicals do play an important role in educating people about our gins, and we are seeing this being more translated into mainstream through the supply chain, through the gin, to the garnish, to the tonic. But my take-home message today to everybody is that there is no right or wrong in the number of botanicals that you choose to use, but let our choices be wise. And that's me done.